Hey everybody, Ben here for the Bonehead podcast, and we've got a double dip for you today. Kings of War, Mantic. If we go over to the website there, the Road to 4th edition, we've got two articles to have a look at. One dropped today, one dropped yesterday, but I was out of office. So we've got movement phase updates and we've got ranged phase updates. So let's look at movement, because when it comes to rank and flank games, moving around is probably the most important element of the game. So 4th edition movement, more fluid, more tactical. Movement is the heartbeat of any war game. It's where positioning, planning and precision come together to shape the battle. For Kings of War 4th edition, I wanted to freshen up the movement phase, not by reinventing it, but by giving players more flexibility and tactical options while keeping the game flowing smoothly. Let's take a look at some of the key changes and updates I've made. So, more agile battle lines. We've introduced additional pivots on certain movement orders, allowing units to be more agile and responsive. This increases fluidity and opens up new tactical possibilities, especially when maneuvering around terrain or setting up charges. It's a subtle change, but one that makes battlefields feel more dynamic and less predictable. So, the upside of a rank and flank game is that it looks awesome. You've got blocks of troops, and you kind of... part of the fun of the game is positioning like your units around terrain to make charges possible or not possible, or to kind of have bottlenecks. You know, 300 Thermopylae, there's a bottleneck that becomes a tactical element of the game. So moving away from that to a more point of where actually this is more about how can we make it easier for players to achieve what would be reasonable. If that's the case here, then that sounds fantastic. So new orders, withdraw and reform. Now we saw these on Tuesday. They were flagged with the little exclamation marks, and we did kind of say, those look like they're orders or special actions. And it is. Huge thing here, combat in 4th edition is now sticky. Units remain fully engaged unless they actively try to disengage. So instead of being pushed away, units now stay in combat, which... it's an interesting one. If you're a new player to Kings of War coming in from other war games, you get it. Like, this is just expected. But the kind of recent games design, if you look at like the way Mantic does stuff or the way that OPR does stuff, is that units stay by themselves after a combat element. So I'm interested to see how that bit plays out. To do so, they must use the new withdraw order, which requires passing a nerve test. Fail and the unit is routed. This is massive. Routing a unit means the unit goes, it's gone. It just is removed from the table. And in this edition of Mantic Kings of War, you don't have wavering anymore. You just have fine or completely gone. And this also could be really interesting to see how the game plays now. So you can come out of a combat situation, but if you mess it up, if your unit is battered, if you've suffered multiple wounds, and actually it makes that nerve test really risky, basically what it means is a healthy, nice, fresh unit should be able to move away. A unit that's been through it might just give up and flee the battlefield instead. However, either of those kind of creates a new opportunity for somebody else to charge in and hit home. So possibly quite good. So it says pass and they can move away, but crucially they cannot charge another unit that turn. This is really good. So that means you can't just be charged by one unit and then go, I don't care about you, doop, and charge somebody else. I would struggle with the theme of that. But I do like the possibility of adding a special rule that allows you to do that. Like, you've got a giant, if they're charged by a swarm, the giant should be able to kind of go, I don't care about you, I'm going for you. So hopefully we'll see that. This adds another layer of risk and decision making to disengaging from combat. The big reward is to open up the enemy for a new charge by your fresh troops that of course you've carefully positioned ready to pounce. What this does on the sneaky side as well is it doesn't mean your units have to be spread to kind of charge in. Like, you can actually have strength in depth now, and that's going to create quite an interesting new play element. I'm really interested to see how that plays out. The reform order allows a unit to reposition its facing either to turn to face an enemy or to combine with a multi-charge. One of the most cinematic uses of the reform action is when a unit's front facing midpoint is in a different arc. It can now wrap around into that arc, creating dramatic battlefield moments and tactical opportunities. So they've got a little bit of a graphic here, which I'm assuming is out of the rulebook, that sort of talks through these two units and the fact that Unit B can wrap around here and that Unit A can use a reform to shuffle across to put themselves in a better situation for later on in the game. This unit can't wrap around because of the house in the way, but if Unit B wraps around to here, Unit A can realign, and that means that in future they've got less movement issues if that unit, for example, disappears, which I would assume it would be, then you've got A can kind of move away there in the future, which is very, yeah, I like that. That makes sense. Charging made smarter, so charges no longer have to follow the shortest route. This is much easier to execute and less prone to controversy by giving players more flexibility in how they approach their targets, especially when navigating terrain or friendly units. So if this makes just executing what you as a player, pretending to be the general of the battlefield, if it just allows you to execute what you think could happen without having it not happen because of rules minutiae, wonderful. Additionally, only 2 units can multi-charge per facing, but they no longer block each other when doing so. Combined with changes to line of sight, which I'll cover in the range face blog, which we'll look at in a second, this makes charges more fluid and less restrictive while still maintaining tactical depth. Okay, so only having 2 units able to charge in one facing of a unit, that's a change. But where we're going to see legions significantly less frequently, like you probably even, I say legions are just bigger, they're just deeper hordes really, aren't they? So yeah, the biggest unit sizes, you may feel like I could probably squeeze an extra charge in that, especially if you've got stuff like chariots or monsters or whatever. But hopefully, where there's no wavering now, if you're charging anybody with 2 units, that should be the only 2 units you need. Potentially, that's a risky thing to say. These changes to the movement phase are all about giving players more control, more options, and more cinematic moments without sacrificing clarity or speed of play. So that's kind of what I mean here. I'm hoping that these rules changes, they help the game make sense. That would be a worthwhile change. Whether you're flanking, reforming, or putting off a desperate withdrawal, movement in Kings of War 4th edition is more engaging than ever. Okay, no more 1-inch standoffs. One of the first things to go was the old rule requiring units to stay 1 inch away from enemy units and less charging. It was fiddly, it slowed the game down, and often led to unnecessary measuring and disputes. Now units can even end up in contact with enemy units, as long as it's clear to both players they're not engaged in combat unless they've charged, of course. This simple charge change helps keep the game moving. So I've actually seen a bit of discourse about this and how that actually the 1 inch buffer helps keep the state of gameplay really clear, and it does in one-page rules as well. This unit is separate to this unit, therefore this unit is doing its thing. This I don't actually think is going to be that big of an issue, and if all it does is just help the processing of the game, then that's probably good. If it makes returning to the game a little bit harder, you may just have to kind of adjust. I don't know. I think that's going to come up, but hopefully it will come up less than trying to stay 1 inch away comes up in the current edition. That would make sense. So in conclusion, the changes to the movement phase make your battle line more fluid and give you 2 very different and potentially complementary options. Okay, wicked. I like that. Let's go back to the homepage. And then let's bounce into shooting. So the ranged phase. So 4th edition, the ranged phase. One of the most consistent pieces of feedback that Alessio received during development was that shooting felt too powerful. Now we already know that you cannot rout a unit simply by shooting. That's interesting actually, because if there's no wavering, can shooting do nothing except soften up a unit? Or is it that actually you can only waver a unit by shooting them and having them fail their nerve? Let's find out. In a game that's fundamentally about blocks of troops clashing in brutal fights, ranged attacks should support your strategy, not dominate it. So one of his key goals for the 4th edition was to rebalance shooting, toning it down, but without making it totally irrelevant. At the same time, he took the opportunity to clean up line of sight and terrain rules, making them more intuitive and consistent. Let's take a look at what's changed. From RA to SH. We've renamed the range stat from RA to SH for shooting. This brings it in line with other Mantic games and creates a clean, consistent naming convention across all the phases. Cool. Line of sight, no more leader point. Gone are the days of measuring line of sight from the leader point. It's interesting actually, I picked up some Kings of War bases that had the leader point marked out. Now line of sight is drawn from anywhere along the front of a unit's base. This makes things much quicker and more intuitive and removes a lot of the ambiguity that could arise in tight formations or unusual angles. They've also improved how cover and terrain is handled, and the new rulebook includes plenty of diagrams to help players visualize these interactions clearly. It's all about making the game smoother and more accessible. All right, okay. As long as there is a way to describe, I mean, if it's just a corner of your unit, right, can draw a line to another unit, I want the rulebook to really clearly draw out whether the whole unit can shoot, or whether it's a small part of the unit, or if there's some kind of hindered rule in there. But you know, these guys, they know the game, they make the game, and if one of my 20 guys long can see that unit, all can shoot, all right, I'm fine with that, if that's the kind of high level game it's going for. So height, now they talked about this in the first of the articles where they said height's gone as a stat. We kind of figured this would be the solution here. So each unit type has a height associated to it. So infantry 2, large infantry and cavalry 3, large cavalry and chariots 4, monsters 5, war engines 2. A hero's height is equal to that of its type. For example, a hero imp will have height 2, hero cav will have height 3, etc. Some units may be exception and have a different height. This will be specified in their entry, e.g. Orklings are height 1. So infantry being 2 is fine. So swarms and small infantry basically will be 1. That's fine. If they can call it out as a specialism, I think that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Shooting modifiers. I've introduced a new modifier, +1 to hit if the unit didn't move instead of -1 for moving. I think we saw this one already. I like the symmetry this creates with the existing -1 for cover, so that quite often they cancel each other out and do no maths basically. Poorly read. Poorly worded by myself. So the thing that's called here is to balance this. Shooting values on units have been adjusting accordingly. I know I saw some comments that said some units that can advance and shoot without penalty now are going to suffer for that, but it's that shooting values on those units being adjusted. I would hope to see that those units would kind of get compensation, otherwise it will change the way they're supposed to play. And one thing that I've really seen now in games where they transfer across editions is they need to be really careful not to lose the narrative that's associated with how units work, right? If I've got an army and I've got a unit and I expect it to do this thing, if it doesn't do this thing, you kind of got to tell me why. So if you're coming into a game and your Egyptian undead army runs away and is as fast as elves, then it's confusing, right? They expect them to be resilient and undead and kind of slow and a little bit, you know, just implacable. That makes sense. So it's about making sure that the narrative is right. So if we've got elves that we want to be kind of agile and running around and still making shots and stuff like this, then I want to see it kind of represented in the rules, which I'm sure we will. Toning down the firepower. Perhaps the biggest change, ranged attacks can no longer rout a unit unless it's already devastated, so it's taken enough damage equal to its nerve value. This helps prevent the frustrating experience of having a key unit deleted in a single volley. Yeah, fair enough. You know, you score half a dozen hits and you boxcar it and the unit's gone. That being gone is okay. Now, if a unit fails a nerve test from shooting, it becomes wavering, not routed. We call it unless it's already on the brink. This change reinforces the idea that Kings of War is a fantasy battle game where decisive moments happen in hand-to-hand combat, not at the end of a crossbow bolt. Shooting still matters, but now it's a tool for softening up the enemy before the decisive charge, not wiping them out from afar. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you make the unit wavering instead of routing them, which means they don't get gone. I mean, I've never experienced Kings of War where a shooting army is wrecked, but I know it happens. So, and the fact that Alessio here has called it out and changed some things to make sure that doesn't happen, it removes the feels bad, but as long as the effect of wavering there is still enough to support you kind of the investment in time and energy and points that you put into your shooting units. Magic missiles. I introduced a new category of spells, magic missiles. These are ranged spells that now interact more cleanly with cover. Okay, most spells hit on a 4+, but magic missiles hit on a 5+ if the target is in cover. This cleans up the large spells table from the previous edition. An example of a magic missile is Fireball. This is now Blast D3 to better distinguish it from Lightning Bolt. Fireball's N values have been halved, but now it has Shattering, giving it a distinct role on the battlefield. And finally, I think, the Arcane Library. The Arcane Library has been made more accessible. Any unit with a spellcaster trait can now purchase spells from that library, and all of these spells are marked with unique use. As the new expansion books are released, armies will gain access to faction-specific spells, adding flavour and tactical variety without overwhelming the core system. I'll be honest with you, I don't know enough about how the current Magic system works to know if I like or dislike this, so I'm going to have the advantage of kind of coming in having forgotten how spells worked anyway, so that's cool with me. In conclusion, the ranged phase in Kings of War 4th edition is now more balanced, more intuitive and more fun. Shooting still plays a vital role, but it's no longer star of the show. That honour, as it should be, belongs to the Clash of Steel and the Roar of Battle, which we'll look at next time with the combat phase, which will be tomorrow. All right, so how do we feel about movement? It sounds like they want to make it just easier to play, which is going to mean that there are some edge cases that we will have to learn. And there may be some stuff that doesn't necessarily line up with how it runs now. Again, that's totally fine. And when it comes to shooting, I think that's probably quite a big change here, is the fact that you cannot delete units just by shooting them. So that might be the biggest vibe change for this whole system, is that those armies that focus on just deleting units are now going to have something to finish them off, which I like. And that may be because it kind of harkens back to older games like Warmaster, where in Warmaster shooting can't destroy a unit, but it can muck it up and soften it up, ready for your combat unit to come in and finish it off. I do really like the narrative here of archers just softening up a unit and then you smashing in with a chariot charge, a cavalry charge, a hero, just something really cool. Like I can definitely see, I can see Alessio having the vision of like, no, we want these units to soften up, and that can totally be fine. And if wavering hinders that unit's ability to charge, and then actually it's as good as. And I think the real big key here is though that the points for the ranged units we would expect to see reduced. If they cannot delete units, you'd expect to see that kind of reduced now. And if not, might be a little bit of an interesting one. All right, so that means that tomorrow on the Kings of War website we will have combat phase, and then advanced games will be next week. So we've seen movement, we've seen ranged, we know now that it's easier to move, that you can't kill a guy by shooting him, but you can soften him up, ready for the combat phase to finish him off. So that is going to be quite an interesting read for tomorrow. But for now, I'm going to wrap up. Let me know in the comments what you think, because I am intrigued to see how 4th is going to play out. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back soon with more gaming content. Happy wargaming.